Welcome back, everyone. This is Rashad Woods with the T.R.O.N podcast. On here today, I have a very special guest, a man who knows the meaning of perseverance and positive thinking. I'd like to welcome Mr. Terry Tucker. Thank you for joining me.
Rashad, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, I obviously your story is so inspiring. I think obviously it's better that you explain it than I ever could. But just briefly, you were at the Citadel Military Academy. You played basketball there. You worked in Wendy's in the marketing department, and the list goes on and on. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall. And I went to college, as you mentioned, at the Citadel on a basketball scholarship, despite having 3 knee surgeries in high school. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame's baseball team. Another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, in the front of the church. But our 5'8" mother was really the boss. It didn't matter how strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. So, grew up in a great family, a great home life. You can imagine it was all about sports. I mean, my parents were running all over God's green earth. I got to practice at this time. My brother's got a game. Who's going where and things like that. Right. I really think that was sort of the foundation, the groundwork that my parents laid for my brothers and I. And all of us have been in some type of service capacity. My brothers are both in education in Chicago.
Right.
And, you mentioned I started out at Wendy's after college, and then I actually went to work for the hospital. My father and my grandmother were dying of cancer when I graduated. I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during that was I was a SWAT Hostage Negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business. High school basketball, but for the last 12 plus years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma.
Yeah, and your story is so inspiring, and I'm so glad that, your positive thinking resonates. You say this very respectfully. For people who thought they had a bad day, something what you're going through and the positive attitude you take with it should change their mindset of what they really think a bad day is. Not saying they're not going through things, but it just shows the power of positivity and perseverance. And your story was incredible when I saw what you went through. It's crazy. So how did you pivot to education, to security? Obviously you had, you went to a military school, but what led to that pivot in the change of your careers at 37, to be a police officer and ultimately to do school security? Yeah,
so you're right. I mean, if you look at my resume, it kind of looks like a Super Ball went off in the room. It's kind of like, Right. There is a backstory, and the backstory is this. So my dad's dad, my paternal grandfather, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. Who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories when he was growing up that my grandmother told of that knock on the door, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to live. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to live. So as I mentioned, when I graduated from college, my father and my grandmother were both dying of different forms of cancer. So I had probably my first major adult decision when I graduated. I could have said, hey, Dad, sorry, I know you're dying, but I'm going to go do my own thing and blaze my own trail. Out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that backstory, my first couple jobs were in business. And I sort of joked, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away and I followed my own dreams. But Rashad, I'll be honest with you. One of the things I'm most proud about in my life is that I never let my dream die.
That's amazing.
I'm 37 years old. I'm making good money as a hospital administrator. I'll just leave it alone.
Right.
But I gave all that up to go to the police academy, to start at the bottom of the barrel and work my way up. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very proud that I never let that die. I knew I was going to do it someday. that day was going to be.
Right. And so while you're a police officer, obviously I read and you said that you were a hostage negotiator. I'm assuming that came in the line of police work.
Yes, I was on the SWAT team as a hostage negotiator.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you give us a rundown of what that's like? And then I want to pivot back to how that works in your current career where you're doing motivational speaking. And does any practices you've learned from being a SWAT negotiator help you in your second career, so to speak?
Sure. Absolutely. And I'll start with this. And they gave us this formula when we started out as negotiators. And the formula was 7-38-55. And it had to do with how we as human beings communicate with each other. And 7% of how we communicate a message are the words that we use. And think how many times you've said something. I know I've done. You said something in my life and be like, "Ooh, I wish I hadn't have said it," or "I wish I would have said this a different way."
Absolutely.
That's only 7% of how that message comes across. Okay. 38% is the tone of voice that you use with those words. Are you really excited and just talking out? Are you really down and depressed? Are you somewhere in the middle? So 38%. And then 55% of how we communicate a message is our body language and our facial expressions. And the reason we were given that formula was that 55% we didn't have as hostage negotiators. I mean, if somebody was barricaded in a room with a gun, I wasn't in the room with them, Absolutely. So I didn't have the luxury of saying, Bob XYZ, and have Bob, see Bob kind of roll his eyes like, "Oh, yeah, an idiot. I can't believe he's in
a situation like that."
Exactly. And that is so important. And so think about that when you communicate a message. If you and I are talking and I'm, like this, what is that saying to you? That's saying what Rashad's saying. I'm saying my own word. So that was one big piece. Another thing, and I think this is important today especially, is a lot of times we'd arrive on scene, have no idea why we were there. And so we would use what was called tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. In other words, help me to understand where you're coming from. And the word there, the important word there is understand. I mean, if I was negotiating with a guy who just murdered 3 people, I wasn't going to say I agreed with what you did.
Right.
But by understanding builds trust, and trust hopefully gets me to a point where I can get that person out safely.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I hate to ask you, does the movies do justice or injustice to how, I just have to ask because it's not often I get a chance to talk to a SWAT negotiator.
No, you're right. And, there was a movie back, I think in the late 90s that Samuel L. Jackson played, it was called The Negotiator. And the guy was like Superman. He did everything. And it was like, and people always ask me, I saw that movie. Is that the way it was?
Not even close.
No, that's not even close. It was definitely a team approach. So I may be the primary, so I'm talking to the person, but sitting right next to me and listening to everything that I'm saying and the other person saying is another negotiator. Right. And then there are probably 4 or 5 more negotiators doing what I used to call working the crowd. What intel can you get me? So I may be talking to the person, and the person, my secondary sitting next to me, may write on a Post-it note, "Don't talk about his mother," because the people working the crowd found out that he had a huge fight with his mother, and he grabbed the gun and he barricaded himself. Right. So it was much more of a team approach. And even when we trained, we had a psychologist that was attached to our unit who would train with us. He would not come out to call-ups at 3 o'clock in the morning. He was smarter than that. And,
training for non.
Yeah, and he was great. I mean, we would do a scenario, then we would debrief, and that's where you learn. Because he might say something like, "Did you ever think this person was schizophrenic and off their medicine?" "Oh no, I never thought about it." So it was that kind of muscle memory, just doing scenarios over and over and over, and then debriefing about what we could learn from those scenarios.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that, and you've shared this story, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm revealing, your medical condition, how you fought.
You can ask me
Gotcha. How you fought through that cancer diagnosis. So I think that there's not even words to, I mean, that's a sentence that stops people in their tracks, right? And you could have you went through the challenges of cancer, during the prime of your life. And how did you manage to battle through that and then come out on the other end still successful and still ultimately with the attitude that you have? Because I think positivity through circumstances like that, I mean, I can't even imagine what you went through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's certainly a call that when you get it, it's like you've got this very rare form of cancer. And when you're told you'll probably be dead in 2 years, you're like, really? I talk about turning your life upside down. And I thought, well, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I could try to turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And really what has gotten me through this are what I call my 3 F's, which are faith, family, and friends, and absolutely in that order. Yeah. I have a very strong faith in God. I feel there's a reason that I am still here after 12 plus years, being told you're going to be dead 10 years ago. And, I'll just give you an example. My doctor, I had my leg amputated in 2020 in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and also found out I had tumors in my lungs, and I still have tumors, still being treated. And my doctor showed me my CAT scan. And Rashad, I don't know how to read a CAT scan. I never went to medical school,
Right.
And so, but you could kind of look at it and be like, well, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there.
Right.
Tumors in my lungs, fluid all around the pleural spaces. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive?
Yeah.
And I will never forget this till the day I die. He put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Right. Which said to me, God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about the dying. Spend more time. Yeah. So, and then you've got my family. And it's my wife and daughter and I. And I'll give you another quick story. So my doctor wanted to start me on chemotherapy after I had my leg amputated. And I remember saying to him, is it going to save my life? And he said, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I remember telling him, it's like, well, if I know I'm going to die anyway, I would rather not go through all that with the outcome being the same, but I'll go home and talk to my family. And it really did happen this way. So I go home and start telling my wife and daughter what happened. And my daughter's immediately, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, So we sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about how we feel about me having chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. And then when we're done with that, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raise their hand. I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting voted for something I don't want to do?
Absolutely.
But Rashad, when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph, because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I loved my wife and daughter more than I loved myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It got me to the drug I'm on now. And then I'm sorry for the long answer, but
no. There's no. I mean, I think that I don't have people on here so I can cut them off and they can't tell their background and story. This is information I wanted to hear. And you're an open book, and I appreciate that. And like I said, your background, you go from Chicago, you go to California for a brief period, you go to Houston, Texas. Now you're in Denver. So, I mean, I don't want to dismiss what you just said. Obviously, that's a large chapter of your life, but you made it a point of emphasis that it's not your entire life, I think, right? You're not defined by the symptoms that you have or the situation that this puts you in. You persevered, and that's amazing. And it led you to so were you in your career of motivation speaking and authoring and entrepreneurship like after the diagnosis, before it? I know 37 was kind of the changing point in your life.
So I was a girls high school basketball coach when we lived in Texas, when I had that callus break open on the bottom of my foot, which is where my cancer started. So I had not been, in the speaking realm. I'd not written a book. I'd not done any of that until after. And, I always say that I've probably done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying of cancer than I've done in my entire life. And I had a pretty good life before I developed cancer. So, a lot of times people just say, oh, this bad thing happened to me. I've got to shut down and I can't do anything with your life. I mean, I want my life to be shaped by the decisions that I made, not by the ones I didn't make or that somebody else made for me. So when I die, that's way out of my control. I spend more time now working on thinking about the living part. How can I take what I've learned during this journey and offer it to other people in the hope that maybe it will help them in their lives? So
when you guys started, your company is actually, what is it?
Motivational Check.
I was looking for my notes here. Yeah, I went to your website, so I apologize about that. So right now, you said that you took steps to make sure that to pivot towards this career. Tell us about the book that you wrote and the steps of positivity and thinking. It says control your mind, embrace pain, and what do you make sure you what you leave behind and what you weave in people. So can you go into further detail about that?
Sure. So never expected to write a book, never wanted to write a book. There's kind of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So, God never spoke to me in my life and said, Terry, write a book. But I think what God did and has done in my life before is put enough people in my path that say, Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should write a book.
Yeah.
So I wrote this book called Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And it was really a book born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached when we lived in Texas, who had moved to an area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Rashad, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth. And there is a reason, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man on social media who was in college who reached out and said, what do you think are the most important things I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help out. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. So I spent some time, took some notes, and eventually kind of came up with these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. So I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle. Yeah. Or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories. And they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
And so, I would imagine, and this is just my opinion talking to you, you really don't have to, not the patience for excuses, because what you went through and how your attitude shaped and molded you and the success that came from it and that, excuses don't work with people like you. And I think, because there's always a way to get through to things. And I think what happens to people, I'll just say one of the hindrances for me of starting this show were two things. Number one, how it would be received. And then you start putting those negative and bad thoughts in your head. That, oh my gosh, it's just going to be another podcast. And then the second one is you procrastinate and then you wish it would happen, right? And then you can't wish anything into existence. And then you start seeding doubts in your head about why you shouldn't do things. And then you actually reached out to me, which was shocking because I was like, who am I? So I think your story shut me up, to say the least, right? Like it did, because it's like, hey man, you never know when you could take a turn in any direction in life. And it's very important.
It's interesting you say that. I did a podcast with a former NFL player, a guy by the name of Marcus Ogden, a great guy. His brother's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we did the podcast and we were talking afterwards. And he said, Terry, when I first started my podcast, I didn't think anybody would care what I had to say. And I'm like, Mark, you've made it to the pinnacle of professional athletics. I mean, it doesn't get any better than you. Are you kidding? I mean, this guy's like 6'6", like 310 pounds. He's huge. He's a mountain of a man.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing. It doesn't matter who we are or what we do. Right. I think we're all kind of, does it matter? Does my life matter? Does anybody care what I have to say? And if you don't mind, I'll tell you a quick story. I had a nurse who was taking care of me when I first started in the infusion center for the treatment that I'm on now. About 25 years old, already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I don't know how to tell it to you. And I mean, I don't know. I'm probably like, what do you say to that? It's kind of like, I hope you. Yeah, exactly. I hope you decide you want to tell me. I can't make you tell me. So she's in and out over the next couple hours and then finally comes in, sits down, says, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, she said, I was going to get out of nursing. I had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you. and I see what you go through every day. I have a very bad reaction to the medicine that I'm administered.
Yeah.
And she said, and I went back in your file and I read all the, your foot amputation, your leg. I went through everything. And she said, when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had impacted a young woman like that in the way that it did. Anybody who's out there listening to us, it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do in your life. There is somebody watching how you handle the adversity you experience in your life and would give almost everything they have just to walk 5 minutes in your shoes. Your story matters.
And I think, and one of the more interesting things is that, I want to keep the focus on you, but hearing stories like this is what inspires me to want to reach out to the next person, ask really good, ready questions, because these are things that people need to hear. Because I think that the internet has kind of disconnected people from reality a bit, and text messaging, and the time that it takes to sit down and hear something like that can go a long way with people. So I appreciate your time.
Sure.
So about your book, and you do motivational speaking and you go to various locations, what are people's receptions to the locations that you speak at?
It depends on the group. Unfortunately, I don't have a leg. I'm in a wheelchair, so getting around is harder for me than maybe for some other people. But I find ways. I do things virtually. I do things more locally than I do traveling to New York or anything like that. Yeah. There's always, like you said, you can always make excuses, or you can figure out a way to make it happen for you.
Right.
And the thing I think you have to remember as a speaker is that it's not about you. It's about the audience. It's about making the audience smarter, happier, better, more resilient, whatever that ends up being. And I think if you focus on that, and I can use my story, and I think that's one of the reasons I'm kind of lucky. I mean, I can talk the talk, but I can also walk the walk. I mean, you can look at me, and that's kind of a pun since I only have one leg. But anyway, so I can say, look, these are things that have occurred and happened to me, and I am offering them to you in the hopes that if they make your life better, then by all means take them, incorporate them in your life. If not, that's okay. Find those things that matter to you in your life and make that part of your soul. And you're absolutely right. I think social media allows us to stay on the surface. It doesn't allow us to go deep. And there's a professor at the University of Chicago, a psychology professor at University of Chicago, who does this experiment with the students. And I love this. And I wish I could do this, but he asks the students to go out and get on a bus. And in 3 questions, be deep with somebody. So you get on a bus, you sit down next to somebody. Hey, how you doing? I'm fine. How are you? Question 1. Right. Question 2. And I'm just making this up. What do you do? I'm a doctor. That's question 2. Question 3. Have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I grew up on a farm. I wanted to be a veterinarian, but XYZ happened. Yeah, my mother died when she was 40 and I really loved her and she was my idol and she was a doctor. So I thought, now you're deep with somebody. Now you're talking about why they do what they do in their lives.
Right.
Anymore. We just kind of, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about it is, a lot of people they can only take small snippets of information. I mean, this has all been studied. If you don't hook somebody in 10 seconds, or if they don't have something that gravitates or grabs their attention, they immediately go to something else. The attention span, the information has always been more available than it ever has been before. Right. But the amount of information and time that they have to absorb it is very small.
It is. And that's just it. And you need to grab somebody. And I think that's why he's like, okay, I want you to be deep in 3 questions. I don't want you to be deep in 10 questions. Get in, find out somebody. And people in a lot of ways are narcissistic. They love themselves. They love to talk about themselves. My wife is in the financial services industry. We would always go to the obligatory holiday party at the end of the year. And I used to go, I was like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in and we're going to meet 5 of your colleagues. At the end of the night, I'm going to come out and I'm going to tell you, how they met their spouse, how many kids they have, where they went to school, why they do what they do. I said, and then Monday morning when you go to work, they're going to come to your office and tell you what a great guy I am. But they're not going to be able to tell you one thing about me, because people don't, they don't say, Rashad, how did you meet your wife? Terry, how did you meet your wife? They don't reciprocate with that question.
No.
And it used to drive her nuts, because I would come out and tell her all about her people she worked with. And then Monday morning, like about 10 o'clock, I get a call from her. this happened. All these people came in and said, you're a great guy, but they couldn't tell me anything about you at all. And you want to be a great conversationalist? Go somewhere with somebody and just ask them about themselves.
Absolutely.
Just be quiet. That's one thing, we would do that as negotiators. We would say something like, if somebody would say something, we'd be like, well, how am I supposed to do that? And then go silent, because we don't like silence as human beings. We want to fill that.
Absolutely.
But if you go silent, now you get the other person to start talking to you. So, I can talk your ear off, but I can also listen pretty well.
I think it's an amazing thing to learn. And, the only way that you were ever going to get your story out, too, is actually by listening to other people. Because then I'm sure in your path that you took in life that took you in a way, you also heard some inspiring stories from people as well, too, who had their own challenges.
Oh, absolutely. I have met so many people along this journey, people so I'm on a clinical trial drug now, and I was on it, in my location, the University of Colorado hospitals, with 2 other people. And unfortunately, they have both passed away.
Yeah.
But one of the people was incredibly negative. Everything. I liked, but I didn't like being around her because she sucked the energy right out of you, because nothing was ever good enough. Nothing. And it was like, look, I'm going into this treatment. I'm going into battle. You know what? I need to be for battle. I don't need you sucking the energy out of me and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
I used to think it was my fault. But then I remember her sister used to bring her for treatment. And I remember meeting her sister, and her sister said to her, you are the most negative person I've ever met in my life. And I'm like, okay, good. It isn't me. It's a family member also seeing that. So you've got a choice in life. You can grab the handle of positivity, or you can grab the handle of negativity. You can get up in the morning and say, do I have to go to treatment, or do I get to go to treatment? Do I have to go to work, or do I get to go to work?
Right. There's there's a lot to soak in just from your background and everything. I just wanted to pivot a little bit towards your career. So you were in the marketing department at Wendy's International, and then that security company you had down in Texas. Can you just give it briefly, those 2 snippets of information? You had like a movie ready made for your life, man.
I don't know. It'd be pretty boring, I think. I'm pushing papers from one side of the desk to the other. I was very lucky. My parents lived in Columbus, Ohio. Wendy's corporate headquarters is located in Dublin, Ohio, which is a northern suburb. And so, they had an opening for a marketing trainee. Rashad, when I started, here I am. I got a college degree. I'm big man on campus kind of thing. Yeah. Most of what I did was make copies, order and pick up lunch for meetings, and fill up the company cars of the marketing managers with gas. I'm like, wait a minute, I got a college degree for this? But if you're a janitor, if you're a garbage man, if you're someone, do the best.
Absolutely.
Be the best copier. I'm making another one.
100%.
So that was tremendous. And I was also at Wendy's when kind of they were in their heyday. I don't know if you're old enough to remember, there was an ad called "Where's the Beef?"
Of course.
So you remember "Where's the Beef"? Well, I was there during that.
That's
Claire
awesome.
Fuller, a little 89-year-old former beauty operator, hairstylist, who was in retirement, answered an ad and becomes one of the most iconic, figures in advertising. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. And then, when I got out of law enforcement, it was like, well, what can I do based on my education, my background, my training that can help people? And so I started a school security consulting business, and I worked with mostly private independent schools around the United States to assess their physical security, write their policies and procedures, and train their staff. So it was just a lot of fun, and I hope schools are safer. The ones I worked with are safer because I had the opportunity to work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's good that a lot of people I've heard and read, took their skills from the police to the private sector. So that's a great accomplishment to be able to do that. Still there, Terry?
I am. You froze for just a second on me.
Oh, I apologize about that. I said it's great. I've read stories oftentimes from people who took their career in law enforcement and took it to the private sector. And that's just another success story. I always like to. So how did you end up in Denver?
My wife's job. My wife has always been the primary breadwinner. So it's kind of like she got an opportunity here to work for a company called Janus, a money management company. And so we moved to Denver.
Okay, awesome. I heard it's beautiful there. I had my brother.
Oh, it is. You should come. You would enjoy it.
I heard it's beautiful. I heard it's absolutely beautiful out there. So I hope to get a chance to make it out there. So, can you tell everybody that the title of the book was again?
Sure. The title of the book is called Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life.
So that, what I like about that too, because it personalizes somebody's life, that it says that you didn't say my extraordinary life, right? You said your extraordinary life, which is great for the reader. So I'd love to get a chance to read a copy of that book, because it puts the person's mind in place that they have an extraordinary life. They just have to have the will to live it, and have the wherewithal to push and do things that ultimately will get them past that self-doubt.
They are. And David Goggins, the former Navy SEAL, talks about small minds and weak people kill big dreams. And, most people, and I think this is true, never even contemplate what it means to be great at anything in their lives. And there's an entrepreneur by the name of Ed Milet. He's out in California. He played baseball at Pacific University. And he talks about the 4 types of people in the world. And when I first heard this, I was like, I got to think about this to see if it's really true. The first group being the unmotivated people. And he said that's the vast majority of people that you will encounter in your life. And the next group he talks about are the motivated. And he said it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. He talks about it being kind of low level, but it's a very effective way for a lot of people to have a great life.
Right.
And then the third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from 2 words, spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy. Right. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And depending on which group, if I'm talking to a group, especially of young people, I always bring that up, be like, all right, show of hands. How many people are unmotivated? Nobody raises their hand. Nobody
put them on the spot. You put them on the spot.
But if you believe Milet, then you know what? Most of the people you'll encounter are unmotivated.
Right.
Don't be one of those people.
Right. And, and it's not, sometimes, when you actually have somebody say something to you, it's almost like when you take those self-assessments, right? It's the privacy of your own home. And then you get the results you don't like. And it's an eye-opener. You're like, geez, this is pretty terrible, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but then when somebody's in front of you, you obviously don't want to have the embarrassment. Like, no, I'm here. I'm inspired. Of course I work hard, right?
No.
I'm fooling myself, right? Like, so, but at the end of the day, you have to go home. And there's a great quote that I've always tried to make sure that I keep in the back of my head. It says, you are who you are when nobody's looking. Yeah. Right. And so it resonates. Did you have any questions for me? Because I know your time is so valuable.
I'm always curious. What made you start a podcast?
Because I'll tell you the truth, I wasn't smart enough to do a lot of things, and I figured I could talk and
I doubt that seriously.
So, it's funny because I would listen to things, and I was a guy who could, right now I'm watching a documentary on the types of dictators that happen around the world. So a lot of it is picking up circa World War I. But long story short, I'm the guy that would always watch a documentary or the History Channel, or even like the history of food or how things were built or made. And so it finally resonated on me that, I was like, well, they do podcasts on this, they do podcasts on that. Why don't I just talk about my own curiosity? And then it resonated. Let me talk to subject matter experts, successful people with compelling stories to kind of feed that need to know information for me, right? And your story is fascinating and it resonates with a lot of people. And I'm not a huge reader because I like to see, I'm a visual person. I like to see things, like to hear people talk. I like to hear speeches and things like that. And so it kind of dawned on me, I said the randomness of nothing, because honestly, I kind of said whatever kind of comes up that could be interesting to people, I think is a positive thing.
You make an incredibly important point about being curious in your life. And so many people, that was one thing we were taught as negotiators, be curious, try to, delve deep with these people about what's going on and things like that. There are a lot of people that just either aren't curious or get to a point in their life and feel, you know what, I know enough. I don't need to know anymore. Yep. I want to be the person, and it sounds like you want to be the same person. You want to die. Your last breath is, I learned something new.
Absolutely.
That's such an important thing that you bring up there. And I can't emphasize that enough, being curious.
You have to. You're literally, like, the world is literally a living, breathing museum. It really is. You just have to, it's there in front of you. You just have to have the wherewithal to find out what's going on, if that's your curiosity.
So if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing?
It's funny. If I was, when it comes to this podcast, I think that the biggest thing that I've kind of learned is my mouth is my best tool, kind of, right? So like, I just think that my talking, I'll pivot a little bit. I had to learn to talk less and listen more. My biggest problem is sometimes I would overtalk, or I wouldn't let people, sometimes too much information is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know everything. I don't know what it's like to be a hostage negotiator. I don't know what it's like to be in security. So I think when it comes to this particular field, I had to reach out to smart people to learn things. And that's my biggest, just because I went to college doesn't mean I'm smart. You know what I mean?
I'm sure we both met a lot of really people with a lot of credentials that are dumber than a box of rocks.
That's it, right? So I owed it to myself to find the information to people. And then what I found out just briefly is when you ask people who do things, they really enjoy talking about it. They generally do.
And do you find that the people you talk with, because I find this, if you reach out to someone, I'll never forget, when I was at Wendy's, you know who Ted Turner is.
Oh, yeah.
So Ted Turner came to Wendy's, and Ted Turner, when I was kind of out of college, was sort of the Elon Musk or the Jeff Bezos, just this real rich guy that, had more money than God.
Oh, yeah.
And he came to Wendy's, and everybody thought, he's going to buy the company. He didn't buy the company and stuff like that. But he was standing in the lobby, and the guy he was with had gone to get his car. And so I went down to him, and I just introduced myself. And I'm like, I'm nobody. I'm this marketing trainee right out of college. Yeah. He talked to me for half an hour.
That's mind-blowing. Most people would never do that.
And that's just it. But a lot of people, if you reach out, it's like, hey, this person's an expert in the field. I want to know something. People are like, he'd never talk to me or she'd never talk to me. You know what? The worst they could say is no.
Absolutely.
But it's amazing, kind of like you just said, the people that are willing to, hey, I've learned some things. Let me offer them to you as well. People want to give back, especially people that have made it to the.
It's crazy. And you would think that, because I think the biggest tool is the curiosity for information. And sometimes in order for me to start this, I had to put myself back into being a little kid. Because what's the first thing a kid does? They touch and grab and seek everything, and they ask you the same question 1,000 times. But as you get older, you it's bad to ask questions. It's bad to, want to know things, or I'm just going to be shut off and not, pursue certain things. You still have to put yourself in the mind of a kid, ask questions.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
You have to. I got 3 daughters, so I had to kind of say, well, you ask questions, why can't I? It's always about learning, and an active mind ages slower.
It does. And it's always, our daughter was visiting, she's married now and in the military, and she and her husband were visiting for Thanksgiving. And she's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy.
Congratulations.
I was saying to her yesterday, I'm like, hey, are you glad you went to the academy? Because I never asked her that question. Right. It's like, would you have rather, her other school was the University of Rochester in New York. I said, would you rather have gone to Rochester?
Yeah.
And she kind of thought about it for a while, and she was like, no. I'm glad I went to the Air Force Academy. It's given me opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Absolutely.
But it's asking your kids those kind of questions.
Yep. Yep. And that's the key to curiosity. Well, I've probably monopolized enough of your time. I can't thank you enough for being on the T.R.O.N podcast. Are there any links or other things you want to leave before we conclude the show?
Yeah, you can get a hold of me at motivationalcheck.com. You can leave me a message there, get access to my social medias and all that. Let me leave you with this one quote. I love to read. I'm a prolific reader, and there's a book called Farewell to Arms. It was written by a man by the name of Ernest Hemingway, and It's kind of a semi-autobiographical book about his time as an ambulance driver with the Italian army during World War I. And there's a quote in there that I absolutely love. And the quote is this: life breaks everyone. Yeah. And afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. So just like if you were to break your arm, the doctor would put it in a cast. When that arm heals, that bone is stronger at the area where it was broken than the rest of the bone. That's just a metaphor for life. We're all going to experience difficulty, adversity in our life. If you can keep moving forward and come out the other side, you will be a stronger and more resilient individual.
Thank you very much for the words of wisdom, Mr. Terry Tucker. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Rashad. I appreciate it.